Gentlemen, welcome back to the Surplus Bunker. Today, I'm going to react to a live stream that was on Trip's channel. And I follow several of the creators who were in that live stream. Trench Grenade, Hop was in there, Brass Fax. And I'm really going to be focusing on Hop and Brass Fax because their experience was essentially rendered invalid by one of the panelists, or at least in his opinion. And his opinion is that, well, I'm only going to seek training and information from people who have a background that's at least on par with me type mentality. So unless you dedicated your youth to serving Uncle Sam, your experience when reviewing an LPVO is invalid, according to this individual, which is one of the most elitist and absurd things that I've ever heard. Now, I understand America is very much based on credentials as a society. We often give a lot of weight to that. And look, there's good reason for that often, depending on the context, and that context matters. If I want information, for example, on an optic, I'm going to go find a YouTuber who reviews lots of optics. I'm not necessarily going to seek out the former gunfighter who probably has pretty limited experience around optics unless they went out and bought a bunch of things after their service and then gained that experience, because your issued optics don't really give you great information as to what the civilian side of things looks like when you get out. So if they're basing their whole review on their experience with an Aimpoint or a Trijicon low-powered optic, that doesn't really give them a baseline to say whether an LPVO is good or not, right? So if they've reviewed 10 different LPVOs, I'm probably going to give that a little more weight. And this is where guys like Brass Fax and Hop come in. They are civilians. They don't have a background, and that's perfectly fine. But they do have a lot of experience with the products that they're reviewing. And that's where guys, even with a background, can give their reviews a lot of weight. Additionally, I want to expand on something else kind of wild, a declarative statement that he made about training civilians, that civilians are essentially untrainable. That is one of the craziest things I've ever heard, though I will say, and I have noticed this, when military and law enforcement guys get out, we have a buy-in still to the tactical world. So we understand often that we need to continue training, and we're always looking for the latest knowledge and information and trying to not rest on tactics we learned a decade ago. We're looking for the latest and greatest info and that knowledge exchange and networking and trying to figure out and sort what the latest and greatest kit items are if we're into the kit as a gear nerd, right? But to say that a civilian is untrainable is pretty wild. I have found, though, that often they don't, like I said, have that buy-in, so many of them are kind of hesitant to get more training. And part of that stems from the elitism of statements like civilians are untrainable. We're seeing more and more civilians interested in tactical training. I think that's fantastic. I'm a firm believer that every armed American should have at least the knowledge of the average Army infantryman. They should be proficient with the battle drills and those types of things, and you can pursue all of that information, and you should. But many private citizens will not go beyond the basic concealed carry level training. And to that point, I've taken people who have never shot a pistol before in their life to tell you how teachable they are, because if you can't teach a civilian the basics and then move them into advanced stuff if they're interesting, that sounds like a problem with you as an instructor. That's not them, unless they are just completely resistant to getting more training because they don't have that buy-in yet. And the more exposure they get, the more carrying of their firearm that they do on a regular basis, the more buy-in they're going to have on understanding, hey, wow, I really don't know a lot. Or if they, God forbid, do find themselves in a situation where they end up having to use their firearm in a defensive way, they're going to realize, like, man, I really do need to learn more. So there is a little bit of a hesitancy, I think, from the civilian side to actually get intermediate and advanced training. But again, that's changing. Tactical training is being more normalized as part of our culture in this country again, which is great because historically, men in this country knew the battle drills. They knew manuals. They were part of their local community defense force, going back all the way through the 1700s, 1800s, 1600s. And we did away with that during the formation of the National Guard, which I think did a great disservice in terms of preparation as a country. So you as a private citizen, again, should seek out that type of knowledge and training. Anyway, guys, those are my thoughts on that live stream. I really hate that in the current year, heading into 2025, that we still have boomer fudge roaming around who just think that civilians are not as worthy because, well, what was the other thing that he said? Oh, well, if I'm going for a helmet review, I've worn a helmet for 40 years. I'm not gonna, that's the kind of person I want. I want somebody who's also professionally worn a helmet. Well, maybe, but if I want information on a helmet, why can't I just go to the guy who has a helmet collection, and then he can compare and contrast the chin strap system, the weight distribution of the helmet, right? Like, think about what you just said. You're going to go to a military guy who's been exposed to what? Maybe 2 or 3 generations of service helmets, and you're going to use that information to base your $1,000, $1,200 purchasing decision off of. Like, that seems to be a pretty dumb idea, in my opinion. And the other thing I will say about a lot of the military guys that I've noticed, with all due respect to those of us who have served, a lot of the information that we're seeing is not as relevant to the civilian population, right? So I like to base my tactics, training, and philosophy more on the civilian security and law enforcement side of things, because what you did in Baghdad during the invasion is not as relevant to CONUS concealed carry of a pistol, right? Or setting up a community defense team, or coming up with a plan or strategy to secure your neighborhood during a civil unrest event, right? So that's the type of training you should be looking for. That's the type of content you're going to see here on my channel. And the type of information that you're likely looking for as well can be found on Trench Grenade's channel, Brass Fax, and Hop. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching, and just wow. Take care.